Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Lead in Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. All right, today's special guest is Edgar Palacios. So without further ado, Edgar, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Let's do it. All right. So we were kind of chopping it up before we hit record about what's going on in our country, in the United States, and some laws that have been passed that are impacting our school, specifically our students that are undocumented. And we're going to jump into that conversation. But before we do, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, again, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm Edgar Palacios. I am the founder of two organizations, one, the Latinx Education Collaborative, which is an organization that started thinking about how do we increase the representation of Latino educators in K-12. And then the other is Revolución Educativa, RevEd for short. And it is an organization that's really interested in how do we build power within the Latino community around issues of education. And so underneath the work, we really think about representation as being something that is super important to our young people and ensuring that they have access to adults who understand the culture, understand the community, can make decisions that might improve the community as well. And so that's the work that I do. We've been doing that work since 2016 as an idea. We formalized the organizations in 2018, and we've been running and on that journey ever since. Our work is important because we also have to acknowledge that 25% of students in K-12 today are Latino. That number is growing significantly and will continue to grow significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. We are also seeing here locally in Kansas City, where I'm based, 30% of our students in Kansas City public school systems are Latino. Across the border, which is just 5 minutes away in the state of Kansas, 62% of students in Kansas City, Kansas public schools are Latino. And so those numbers are not going to disappear anytime soon. And that's why we exist. We think about how do we create those spaces where young people feel like they can attain success. And we think representation is a part of that.
There we go. Representation is a part of that, and that's very important. And if we had the time, I could dig into like just some of the discoveries I've had as a school, going back into schools and being a principal again here in Phoenix. And one of the things that's really been on my radar is just kind of looking at the campuses. So I have 3 campuses that I oversee, and the demographics look differently. However, overall, our demographics are primarily Black and brown, but I have one campus that is, I would say, about 90% Hispanic. And when I start thinking about and kind of talking to some of my staff about the ICE, I don't know what to call it. I try not to, it's like, it's hard not to pay attention to certain things, but then It's just all over social media. But like the idea of they basically can have the right, if you will, to come into school and take students that are undocumented. And so that is something that is a concern of mine, a concern of my staff, and of course the students as well. What are some of the things that you're seeing? What are some things that you're working on that you can kind of do to support other educators out there?
Yeah, first and foremost, I'd like to say that we are all in a learning mode. We're learning the language, we're learning the laws, we're learning the policies, we're learning what are some helpful things to do. We're learning what are some unhelpful things to do. This is a great opportunity and great moment. I say that knowing, like, understanding the context, but it is a great opportunity for us to kind of just remain open to learning and understanding that things are going to shift, and they're shifting quickly. And so that's first and foremost. Secondly, one thing that I'm learning as a leader in this moment is that we have to rely on people who understand know your rights training. We have organizations in Kansas City like AIR, which is the Advocates for Immigrants' Rights and Reconciliation, KS MODA, which is the Kansas Missouri Dream Alliance, and other groups. They are actively doing know your rights training. They're verifying like sightings of ICE. They're helping prepare leaders in our community to ensure that we do the right things and that we also understand like what we can or cannot do. And so I even hearing the new policy by President Trump around hospitals and schools not being safe zones anymore, that there's still a responsibility for educators and principals, for the folks who are in charge, to say, here's what our policy is going to look like. Here's what happens when somebody from ICE comes to the door. You don't have to let them in. You have to check their warrants, making sure that the warrants are proper documentation. These are people that are going to, they're still guests in your building. And so organizing and partnering with local organizations that have been doing this for years and have been prepping for these moments is what I would say that is really important, and figuring out how to connect those dots. I also think that one thing that I'm really proud of seeing is some of the school districts and systems and their statements saying that they are committed to ensuring that young people will be safe on campus. And they're also proactively listing some of the steps that they're taking to ensure that that happens. I think that goes a long way in establishing trust, particularly if you're doing that in multiple languages. If you serve a student demographic that is multilingual, getting that message out and ensuring that parents and families in the community knows that these are still going to be safe places for folks is really helpful. So we've been supporting some folks on that. It's also important in this moment that we understand that rest is radical and we have to take care of ourselves. We have to seek joy and joyful moments in this time, and we have to create spaces for that. And so as an organization, we're really thinking about how are we, one, creating spaces where people can come in and just share what's going on with their lives, and then figuring out what kind of supports, mental health supports people need. That is not our direct scope of work. And we have a responsibility in this moment to say, clearly you got a lot going on. Clearly, like, there's other issues here that we're facing. And so, like, how do we get you some additional supports to make sure that your mindset is right? Even in the last week, to become depressed, to become confused, to become like, what's the point of all this? Particularly when it's just all flooding in at all times. So yeah, I don't think our responsibility goes away. We can continue to say, like, these are the spaces that I have power or influence over, and these are the ways that I can keep our community safe and still not create additional harm in other ways to folks. So those are some initial thoughts that I
Some
have.
initial thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And one of the things that stood out to me in some of those initial thoughts was making a statement. And this is something that I have not done. So this is good feedback for me. So that's on my to-do list. Starting today's Sunday, that's what I'm going to be working on tomorrow, is putting out a statement. Why do you think that statement is so important for us to do that?
What I struggle with it. So I've lived in a world where statements are placed and then the values are not aligned with those statements.
Okay.
But I do think that right now there's an opportunity not just to state, hey, I believe in these things, but also just stating the process that you're taking. Because I think having clarity and transparency around that helps to build trust, which is lacking in this moment. And one thing that I'm learning is that if you are not controlling your narrative, somebody else is controlling it for you. So let's say an incident happens at your school, and we all live in community, and we know that things travel quickly in community. And so you want to have people to be able to point to something to say, like, hey, like, maybe let's slow down a little bit. Here's what they said that they were going to do. Let's maybe check in. That's a helpful thing. It also helps your advocates and your champions also help, again, ease the tension that we're seeing. It also helps you think about it clearly, like, you as a leader, like, writing that down on paper helps you have some clarity for that moment, if and when it does happen, to say, like, oh, okay, we've planned for this moment and we actually have it on paper. That those are some reasons why the statement is important. Now, also, I would say your leaders in community. And so my hope is that by having schools and systems do this, that you're also encouraging and demonstrating it for other people, and that they're taking the responsibility and time to put out those statements themselves. This is how we're going to act during this time. Here's what we're going to continue to do. Here's, if you have any questions or concerns, here's who to talk to immediately. Those are some ways that just helps build trust.
I find it interesting that you mentioned that you kind of struggle with the idea of statements, and I'm with you. Like, we can say stuff all the time, but if there's no action built behind it, then what's the point of saying it? Sometimes people do things just to say that they did it, to check off a box. It really needs to be very intentional.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sitting here disappointed in some ways, just as a human. Forget me as a leader in a community. Forget me as running organizations. I'm looking at this moment in time. I'm seeing anti-DEI bills come down at the federal level, at the state level, locally. We're debating, like, what does that look like? And it's like we kind of just forgot that, one, there was this moment between the pandemic and today where, like, we thought diversity was a good thing. We said diversity was a good thing. We said that we cared about Black and brown people, and, like, that we were going to do these things, that we're going to condemn police violence. We're going to do all these things, and, like, we're going to make America a better place.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'm not going to say it. No. And here we are within the first week of an administration, like you're starting to see people actively take out DEI
Yeah.
departments, issues, all that other stuff. And how quickly we forgot that like we need diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And again, I'm talking off the cuff and just more personally here.
Yeah.
Like the people that benefit from those policies don't cease to exist. You can eliminate the actions, but like the inequities and who are designed to benefit from those things, like they just don't go away. And so what are the solutions? Like, what does it look like? I'll give you a good example of kind of in the higher education pipeline. In the state of Missouri, we have an attorney general who is doing a phenomenal job of scaring institutions like universities and saying, like, we're going to come after all your public dollars if you don't eliminate DEI departments and whatnot. And if you don't provide scholarships without concern or to race and all this other stuff. And who do you think like goes to college? Like, like we are eliminating and closing up opportunities for young people to like think that these things are possible. So I know it's intentional. I understand that there's a group of people in power that are excited about these moments, but I also just think it just lacks strategic vision for the future because populations are still growing. Like this country will be majority minority not too long from now. And we're just headed for greater tension. So
folks, I think it's important that we mention, Edgar, that we're recording this on today is January the 26th. So it's only been a week since the new administration has come in. So this is not going to air for a few weeks or so, about a month from now. I'm just thinking like the timing wise, you're like, y'all just now, this is just this is fresh, I guess. Fresh for us. That's on our minds. One of the things that I went ahead and did, because I'm just curious, kind of get your take on this again, thinking from an administrator's lens, is I jumped on the ACLU site to just kind of see what's going on, some recommendations that are out there. So I'm going to share this on the screen.
Yeah.
And it kind of talks about know your rights. So if you're not familiar with this information, folks, please, and I'll leave a link in the show notes so you can kind of look into this, but it talks about how to reduce risk to yourself, stay calm, don't run, argue, resist, or obstruct the officer, even if you believe your rights are being violated. Keep your hands where police can see them. And that's across the board, especially folks of color. We kind of already know those things, but it's good to be reminded about that. But what I think is really important is where it talks about your rights. And let me see if I can kind of make this a little bit bigger here so that it shows a little bit better. But it talks about you have the right to remain silent. If you are not a U.S. citizen and an immigration agent requests your immigration papers, you must show them if you have them with you. And if you're over 18, carry your papers with you all the time. And then it talks about what to do if you're in the encounter. What are some things that you know about, Edgar, from an administrator side? And I know you mentioned you don't have to let folks in unless they have a warrant. What are some other things that you might be aware of in regards to, let's say, I'm a school principal or an administrator and ICE shows up? What are some things we should know about?
The training is so important. And I would encourage any administrator right now, even if this is late February where this is airing and maybe things have improved dramatically and like ICE is no longer a threat, and the world has changed. It's still important to partner with folks on the ground, first and foremost, who understand know your rights training and like that you're building a relationship with them. Because ultimately, let's say you have an encounter and this is right. ICE is at your front step. They may not have the warrant that they need in order to be there. You also have to figure out how to organize in community. You should have a contact outside of your school that's able to come in and support. You should have advocates on the ground who are organized in some shape, way, or form that they can help with the situation and also help prevent any more harm from happening. So in Kansas City, for example, there's a great organization called Surge KC. It's called Showing Up for Racial Justice Kansas City. And it's a group of white folks who are allied to these issues. And they are also planning on like, how do we intervene? How do we interrupt? How do we also use our privilege to make sure that young people are safe? So that's one thing that I would say. In Phoenix, there's a great organization called All In Ed. You may be familiar with it. And they are doing parent trainings. If I'm not mistaken, Stephanie Parra runs that organization. She'll be, I'm sure, be able to connect you to folks on the ground in the Phoenix area. But I do think it is about understanding your community, understanding who provides these resources, and then training on them. Unfortunately, I think having a simulation or two, so you have some practice in. So when it does happen in real life, you're not making the mistakes that you would be on the first time around. Those are recommendations that I would make. And so being intentional about it, having the internal conversations with educators and being aligned what that looks like. But also here's the other thing. One thing that I'm learning and that I've been a little ignorant to is that like not every educator carries these values either. And so,
that's a good point.
like these are the times to have those conversations. And I know that administrators have to be cautious in the way that they're moving and cautious with like how they're incorporating all perspectives. But I do think it's a great opportunity to understand like who is on the team and who is not, and then figuring out what that looks like as well, right? Because how do you train for that? How do you develop people to understand these issues? How do you train for the fact that like our biggest priority is young people in this moment and their safety? And yeah, so I do think like, I assume that we live in a world where like most people agree that having ICE show up to your front step is not an ideal situation for anybody. And I'm also curious about the people who might be teaching today that are like, no, like they absolutely should be here and like, let's go help and support them. So I think that this is a time for a lot of those tense conversations that are going to pop up, and you're going to know who you're working with. And that is even more frightening because these issues are bigger than just immigration. Now we're talking about curriculum. Now we're talking about internalized belief systems around kids. Now we're talking about all these other issues that are highlighted by an ICE interaction, but really just say like, do you actually care about all students? Do you understand that most, if not all students have the opportunity to learn? When we're talking about equity here, like this is such a great opportunity to see like who values it and who doesn't. And I just fear that like not everybody is in alignment with that. So,
bro, you bring up such a point that I did not even think about. You and I are having this conversation. Folks that are listening to the show they know what my show, unless this is their first time listening to this show, they kind of know what to expect from my content. So I am assuming, and we are assuming, that everybody that's listening, everybody's at the school is about that life and really cares. But you're right. There could be staff members at our schools that, we should be doing that. It's about time. And I didn't even think about that because, again, I'm just like, to me, if you're in front of kids, you should care about all kids, like you said, like all kids, no matter what their background, whatever it is. They're in your classroom, they're in your school. We love them. We should love them. Yeah. But then, and you know, a lot of schools, we try our best not to talk about politics and things like that because it could ruffle feathers, and that could be a whole nother thing. Yeah. So we really are making a lot of assumptions at this moment. And again, we're about a month out before this publishes, and for all we know, things will be better. This whole conversation would be pointless. But I didn't think about it that way.
I got to jump in, and I think something that I have to remind myself is that like this is systemic. It's not just one person who's leading these ideas. It's a group of people that are working together to make sure that these policies, that these issues, that the rights are being undermined and underestimated in so many different ways. And these are systems that existed for longer than just last week, and longer than the last 4 years, and longer than the last 100 years, right? And so I'm hopeful that people understand that they still have power. I'm hopeful that educators and people on the ground understand that like there's still work to be done. I'm hopeful that they understand that it's not pointless or hopeless. It's difficult. Sure. It's draining. But the reality is, like, I heard this said on somebody I admire. It was like, we're on the verge of a new civil rights movement. Like they were just simply saying that, like, I didn't think that I would ever be a part of a new emerging civil rights movement. And here's like where we're headed. And that's really just hit me because we fixed racism back in the 60s. I don't know if you know this, but like in the 60s and the 70s, racism was like done. And here we are.
This is someone told you that it was done in the 60s and 70s?
I think we operate as a country like that. These are issues that are no longer, important or relevant. I think we operate under the fact that, like,
on paper,
is it on paper? Yeah. Because
okay.
I hear people talking about that out loud, right? Like, it has not been my experience.
Yeah, I was like, wait.
But I've heard people say that you're like, this is not an issue anymore.
Sure.
We operate in education like that sometimes because, like, here we are worried about, I don't know, like, Black history. We're worried about Latino history, and that's what's being taught to our schools. And we looked at the 1776 pride, like all this other crazy stuff that's happened, and that's just a continuation of this. Like we're going to continue to experience this, and that's what I hear. Like put on the batteries, because like you got work to do, and it just doesn't. We can't stop fighting in this moment. We can't stop organizing in this moment, and we can't stop. This is a great opportunity to build relationships with community that you may have not traditionally worked with in the past. So
would you recommend, and if I'm off base, let me know, stop me, right? Would you, because I was just talking to my safety committee the other day, and we're talking about the next drills that we do. So we do, your traditional fire drills, we do your traditional active shooter drills.
Yeah.
Should we add in an ICE drill or something similar?
It's interesting. I do think that there should be some training around what happens. And this is where I would pull in some experts in the community, see like what's going on, only because this is real trauma. And if you do have young people who are on the grounds and they happen to be undocumented and people don't know that, or like we serve kids that are part of mixed status families. I would hate to also create unnecessary fear. But I do think that working with local on the ground community organizers who understand these issues, they're going to have a better take about what that looks like. And I do think practice is important. And so if there's a way of doing a simulation that does not cause additional harm within community, that is important. But again, there are people who are much smarter and brighter than me on what this looks like. And it just comes with real consequences to young people who might be afraid of these moments. So
I'm with you. I'm with you on that, because even the active shooter, you got to be very sensitive with that, especially that's a whole nother lane of safety concern that we're seeing a lot more. Yeah. So those kind of things still happen. So what I'm hearing is probably your best, especially if you're not just well versed in this, is to start looking on the local level, find some organizations that are offering support, that this is what they're doing, and they can collaborate with you, form those partnerships. That's to me where things should get started.
Yeah. Those experts are there in places like Arizona. There's a lot of organizations that are working collaboratively and collectively on that. In places in the Midwest, we might have fewer, although the ones that we do are incredibly talented and are working 24/7 right now to make sure community is safe. Again, if you're a school leader, this is an opportunity again to start searching locally and start building relationships with the local Latino community. And I hesitate saying that only because immigration issues are not just Latino and Hispanic issues. In Kansas City, we're seeing young people from all over the world. We're seeing influx of students from Eastern Africa. We're seeing an influx of students from North, South America, the Venezuelan, Colombian countries. So like it's a worldwide issue. It's not just a Latino Mexican issue. And so that's something that I like to remind people, that like there's a community of folks that are being negatively impacted by this. And also, even if you are part of if you're a citizen or you have status, like these issues impact you directly. The negative rhetoric around immigration and the negative impact of that impacts us all, not just people who don't have status.
Yeah, and I would agree that it's not just our Hispanic communities, Latinx communities. However, a lot of them are being targeted. Like this is kind of like a lot of the target is going that direction. Yes, there's absolutely folks from different countries. You got folks coming in from Ukraine. I didn't see ICE regulations going in to raid for Ukrainians. I'm just saying. So, but yes, you are absolutely correct on that. So look for local folks. Now, what if let's say I'm in a rural area and I don't have access to a local organization?
Okay.
What are your thoughts on, maybe are there some national organizations that you can think of, or what kind of suggestions would you have in that sense?
Yeah, I do like this idea of the ACLU. I know I'm getting a lot of my information right now from the ACLU, and I know that they have really great graphics and on like knowing your rights and whatnot. For the rural communities, I actually think about I would first assess what are our local leaders talking about, and are the local leaders understanding where are they on this issue? Because it's interesting in Missouri that we have communities that are rural that are 90% Hispanic, Latino, and they have an incentive not to invite ICE or any other government agency into, because it would decimate their community in so many different ways. So I would try to want to understand like what's the community's perspective on this. Two, I would say that there are resources online that are helpful, and there are organizations like the ACLU. There's other immigrant-led and immigrant United We Dream comes to mind, where you can follow for those practices. And then three, I'm curious about how you would build community with those that are a part of that status. And how are you actually, as a person, having those one-on-one conversations with folks so you understand what their fears are and you understand what's happening at that level, and understanding kind of what resources you could provide there as well, right? Oftentimes we shy away from asking questions, and oftentimes we're like, I don't want to, like, whatever. I think there are ways to lean into those conversations without harming anyone and without asking the wrong questions, so to speak. But people want to talk, and they want to know that they have people that they can trust. And these are one of those moments where there are people that are looking at school leaders and schools as places to have the right information. And so being able to be a part of community and to double down maybe on your parent engagement efforts, maybe to double down on opening up the school at different times so you can have those community conversations in a safe environment, that might help. Yeah, it's tough not to have those organizations around, and calling up people is also helpful, I would say. So if there's contacts out there to build those relationships, you may never know that there might be somebody that actually understands those issues on a local level that you're connected to as well. So
love it. All right. At the end of the day, like we said, maybe a month from now, things will be different, and this conversation may not even be all that important a month from now. So that's the hope, maybe we wasted our time and the listeners' time.
Sorry about that. We had a short scare there, and yeah.
So okay, all right. Well, listen. Either way, I've learned a lot, Edgar, and I'm sure our audience has had a lot of things to think about in this conversation. I'd love for you to take us home with any final words of advice you want to provide to our listeners.
The first thought that I would have is that these issues impact all of us, not just the ones that are the most harmed by them. That we are learning that community building is such a critical tool right now, that we have to build trust within community. And that means that sometimes we have to be uncomfortable and lean into conversations that we may not know how to navigate fully. I also have been inspired by how community is coming together to address some of these issues. And so if you can create spaces, or if you can host meetings or bring leaders and others together to support the work, you'll find that there are people that are willing to do that, and they're willing to be a part of those conversations. The other thing I always offer to folks is that I don't believe that the education of a child is just a school's or district responsibility. It is the responsibility of the entire community. So if you're listening and you're not an educator, but you're thinking about becoming an educator, or you don't know what's your next step, everything starts at the school level. And so build relationships with your school leaders, offer them the support, see what they need, and show up for kids. The reality is education is still happening. Kids are still going to school. You're still seeing so many other issues that need to be addressed in these moments. And so community has some of those answers. Community has some of those resources. And now is a time, if you haven't already, to start building those relationships more deeply, and leaning into that kind of mentality.
All right, cool. I like that. It has truly been fun talking to you about this. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
Yeah, you can find my organizations online at Latinx Edco, Latinx EDCO, or at RevEdKC, REVEDKC. You can email me at edgar@latinx.org, latinx.org. Edgar's EDGAR. Let me try that again. EDGAR@latinx.org. And I'm happy to connect with anybody. I'm also happy to share resources as well. So if you have a question that I'm not the right person for, I'm glad to be a part of a network of people who might be able to support in a different way. But I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And I'm hopeful that none of this matters a month from now. So,
all right. Me too. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Edgar. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.